Hey everyone, this is Taehyung. Before anything else, I want to know where you're listening from. Leave your country in the comments. I've learned that even when words feel heavy, knowing you're not alone makes them easier to carry. I never planned for this moment. I never imagined I would sit here and feel that silence could weigh more than honesty. But after so many years of being seen, photographed, interpreted, and rewritten, I realized that silence can become its own kind of story. And sometimes, that story grows louder than the truth itself. For a long time, my voice traveled through music, through stages lit so brightly that shadows disappeared, through performances where emotions were carefully shaped into something beautiful and controlled. But there was always a part of me that lived outside the spotlight, not hidden intentionally, just waiting for the right moment to breathe without hurting the people I love. Being part of BTS was never only about music. It was 7 lives moving forward together, sometimes perfectly aligned, sometimes quietly clashing, but always tied by something deeper than contracts or fame. We grew up together under pressure that never eased, learning who we were while the world watched every step. Namjoon taught me early on that words are not harmless. Once spoken, they carry responsibility. Jin showed me that warmth can exist even when expectations feel unbearable. Yoongi taught me that silence is not emptiness, but a language of its own. Hoseok turned fear into light without ever pretending it wasn't there. Jimin carried empathy so naturally that it often reflected parts of myself I hadn't yet understood. And Jungkook existed in my life in a way that never followed a script. The world thinks it knows us because it sees us. Cameras capture moments. Headlines freeze expressions into meaning. Somewhere along the way, a story began forming around Jungkook and me. A story built from fragments, from glances taken out of time, from closeness that was real but never simple. What the world called rumors, we experienced as something far more human. When you grow up together, train together, break down and rebuild together, boundaries blur in ways outsiders rarely understand. We were teenagers learning how to survive an industry that demands certainty before you even understand yourself. There were nights when exhaustion made words unnecessary, moments when laughter existed without an audience, times when questions surfaced that neither of us knew how to answer yet. And no, this was never about labels. It still is. It was about connection, about how two people can become mirrors for each other without realizing it. Affection doesn't always arrive in forms the world recognizes. Sometimes it exists quietly, without declarations or definitions. The truth people demand is often simpler than the truth we live with, and that gap is where misunderstandings grow. There were moments when the closeness between Jungkook and me felt like comfort. Other times, it felt heavy. Not because it was wrong, but because the world was always watching, waiting to turn sincerity into spectacle. During those moments, the other members were never distant. They were anchors, Namjoon's quiet guidance, Jin's steady humor, Yoongi's blunt clarity, Hoseok's unspoken encouragement, Jimin's understanding glances. They reminded us that whatever we were feeling, we weren't alone in it. I want to say this clearly, not to satisfy curiosity, but to restore dignity to a story that's been stretched too thin. What existed between Jungkook and me was real in the way shared growth is real, in the way trust forms when two people see each other at their weakest. It was not a performance, not a secret designed to shock, not a narrative meant to be consumed and forgotten. It was a chapter of our lives that shaped who we became, individually and together. Fame simplifies people into characters, but we are not characters. We are 7 individuals learning how to move as one without losing ourselves entirely. That process is messy. Sometimes it leaves behind stories the world misunderstands, and sometimes it asks one of us to speak, not to defend, but to clarify. When I chose to speak, I wasn't trying to surprise anyone. I wanted to slow the noise, to remind people that behind every headline is a human story, and behind every rumor is a moment that once mattered deeply to someone. Jungkook remains precious to me, not because of what the world believes, but because of what we truly shared: trust, growth, and a bond that helped both of us survive becoming who we are under lights that never turn off. This is not a confession meant to shock. It is an acknowledgement meant to heal. For us, for the members who stood beside us, and for the fans who have always listened, not just with their ears but with their hearts. The night after I spoke, the world didn't go quiet. It grew louder than I had ever experienced. Screens glowed everywhere. Messages stacked endlessly. I could feel millions of eyes searching my words, replaying them, dissecting every pause. I sat alone, letting the silence press against my chest. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel everything without arranging it into something acceptable for others. I thought about how long this story had lived inside me, not as a rumor, but as a quiet truth shaping the way I moved, laughed, and stood beside the others on stage. People believe idols live in extremes: perfect happiness or complete collapse. The truth exists somewhere in between. And that is where my reality has always been. The morning after everything began to surface felt unreal, not dramatic, not explosive, just heavy in a way that settled quietly into my chest. I woke up before my alarm, the city outside still half asleep, and for a moment I forgot why my thoughts felt so loud. Then the weight returned. Not fear exactly, awareness. The kind that comes when you realize a truth has left your hands and begun traveling on its own. My phone was already alive before I touched it. Messages, headlines, reactions layered on top of one another like waves that never fully broke. People searching for meaning where there was nuance, demanding certainty where there had only ever been humanity. I didn't open everything. I didn't need to. The energy alone told me how fast the story was growing beyond me. I thought about Jungkook immediately, not in panic but in recognition. We had always shared that sense, the ability to feel shifts before they fully arrived. I knew he would be carrying the same weight in his own way, filtering the noise through a heart that has always felt deeply, even when he tries to protect it. People often assume closeness is simple, that it begins clearly and ends cleanly. But what we lived was never linear. It didn't start with a decision. It grew gradually, in spaces too quiet for cameras to reach. Late nights after schedules ended, long practices when everyone else had already gone home, moments when exhaustion stripped us down to who we were without performance. We were young, younger than people remember, growing up under lights that never dimmed, learning discipline before understanding ourselves. In that environment, connection becomes oxygen. You don't question it. You don't label it. You just breathe. There were days when Jungkook and I barely spoke, both lost in our own thoughts. And there were days when silence between us felt complete, as if words would only interrupt something understood. That kind of connection is easy to misunderstand from the outside, especially when fragments are taken and frozen into narratives that were never lived. As reactions poured in, I found myself thinking about the others. Namjoon, first as always. I imagined him sitting quietly, reading carefully, not just the words but the implications. He has always carried the group on his shoulders in ways people rarely see, not by controlling but by considering. I knew his concern wouldn't be about image alone. It would be about balance, about protecting all 7 of us from being reduced to something smaller than we are. Jin crossed my mind next. His humor often hides how perceptive he is. I could almost hear him telling me to eat, to sleep, to not let the world convince me that one moment defines an entire life. His support has never been loud. It's steady, reliable, the kind that reminds you that no matter how loud the outside gets, home still exists. Yoongi would pretend indifference, but I know better. He understands the cost of honesty in an industry built on expectations. He knows what it's like to have your inner world interpreted by strangers. His silence has always been protective, not distant. Thinking of him made me feel less alone. Hoseok worries quietly. He senses shifts before they're spoken. I knew he'd be watching closely, not just for how the world reacted, but for how we reacted to each other. He believes deeply that truth, even when uncomfortable, leads somewhere brighter if you allow it. And Jimin, just thinking of him tightened my chest. He feels emotions like currents, moving through him whether he wants them to or not. I knew he would be thinking about all of us, about how fragile trust can feel when it's stretched between public perception and private reality. His empathy has always been a mirror, reflecting parts of myself I sometimes avoid. And Jungkook, always Jungkook. People think they understand him because of his talent, his discipline, his perfection on stage. But there is a softness beneath all of that, a depth that doesn't ask to be seen but exists fully regardless. What I felt toward him was never something I could package for the world. It didn't belong to statements or explanations. It was shaped by growth, by shared pressure, by surviving together when neither of us knew who we were becoming. There were times when that closeness grounded me, times when it challenged me, times when it scared me, not because it was wrong, but because I knew how easily it could be misinterpreted. As the hours passed, something became clear to me. The shock wasn't only about what I had acknowledged. It was about the illusion people cling to, the idea that they fully understand the lives of those they admire. My words disrupted that illusion, and disruption always creates discomfort. But discomfort is not destruction. Sometimes it's the beginning of honesty. I didn't regret speaking. Fear lingered, yes. Fear always does, but regret didn't. For too long, my identity had been filtered through expectations, through images shaped by others. In choosing to speak, I wasn't rejecting the love people have given us. I was trusting it, trusting that it was strong enough to hold complexity. That night before sleep finally came, I thought about the future. Not about charts or awards or stages. About the kind of person I wanted to be. Someone who hides forever, or someone who risks being seen. Being part of BTS has always meant living in duality. We are symbols to many, but we are also human to each other. We carry history in our bodies, shared injuries, shared laughter, shared silence that doesn't need explanation. Whatever the world chooses to believe, one truth remains unchanged. We are 7 individuals bound by shared dreams and shared survival. Public opinion has tested us before. It will test us again. But the bond we built in rooms far smaller than these headlines has already endured more than this. When the night grew quiet again, there was a strange calm inside me. Not because everything was resolved, but because I was no longer carrying something alone. For the first time, silence wasn't hiding a truth it couldn't hold. It was simply quiet. The days that followed felt heavier than any world tour I had ever lived through. Heavier than the silence backstage before the lights rise. Every morning I woke up with the same pressure resting quietly in my chest. It wasn't panic. It was awareness. The understanding that once a truth is spoken, it never returns to being private. It changes shape. It travels. It grows beyond you. And yet, beneath all of that movement, something unexpected settled in me. Calm. Not the kind that erases uncertainty, but the kind that comes when you stop running from yourself. Jungkook noticed it before anyone else. He always does. There is something about the way he reads the air around people, the way he senses emotional shifts before they're spoken. We didn't talk immediately. We didn't need to. We had always shared an understanding that words should arrive when they're ready, not when they're forced. We sat together in the practice room long after everyone else had left. The lights were dim. The mirrors reflected 2 versions of ourselves shaped by the same years, the same pressure, the same spotlight. We didn't fill the space with explanations. Silence between us was never empty. It was layered with memories, with shared glances on stage, with hands brushing in crowded hallways, with moments that meant nothing to the world and everything to us. When Jungkook finally spoke, his voice was quiet, not fragile, thoughtful. He said he had always known this moment would come, even if he didn't know when. He admitted that carrying things alone had grown heavier than facing whatever followed honesty. I listened, not to respond, but to understand. That has always been the foundation between us. We talked about fear, not dramatically, honestly. Fear of misunderstanding, fear of hurting the group, fear of becoming something the world could twist beyond recognition. We talked about the times we pulled away, not because feelings disappeared, but because we didn't know how to protect them. There was no grand confession between us, no declaration meant to rewrite anything, just two people acknowledging the truth of what shaped them, choosing not to hide from it anymore, at least not from each other. What people don't see is how much effort it takes to preserve something delicate in a world that thrives on exposure. Affection becomes spectacle, connection becomes currency, and privacy feels like rebellion. For a long time, we believed silence was protection. But silence can also become a burden. RM was the one who grounded us when the noise outside began to swell again. He called all 7 of us together like he always does when things feel unsteady. No cameras, no staff, just us. The kind of space that reminds you who you are without performance. He spoke calmly, not as a leader giving direction, but as someone carrying responsibility with care. He reminded us that stories will exist whether we participate in them or not, that if we don't tend to the truth, others will reshape it for us. His words weren't pressure, they were permission. Jin tried to lighten the air at first, joking in a way that made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. But later, when it was quiet, his voice softened. He said something that stayed with me. Carrying things alone doesn't make you strong. It just makes you tired. Coming from him, the oldest, the one who has always shielded others quietly, it felt like a hand resting gently on my shoulder. Yoongi didn't speak much, but when he did, it mattered. He said people will talk no matter what. Silence invites imagination. Honesty invites reaction. Neither guarantees peace, so you choose what you can live with. There was no judgment in his tone, only understanding, the kind that doesn't demand explanation. Hosak's support came in warmth. He reminded us why we started this journey in the first place, not for perfection, not for approval, but for expression, for connection. He said truth doesn't have to be heavy to be real. Sometimes it's just choosing joy without apology. Jimin stayed close to me during those days, closer than usual. He didn't need many words. He understood the vulnerability of being seen, of having emotions laid bare in front of millions. He told me quietly that whatever happens, we face it as 7, like we always have. That promise, spoken so simply, carried more weight than any headline. And Jungkook. With him, everything felt both fragile and unbreakable. We talked late into the night about the past, about misunderstandings, about how easily affection can be misread when your life is lived under constant observation. We acknowledged the pain, the confusion, the moments we chose distance out of fear rather than absence of feeling. There was relief in that honesty, not because it solved everything, but because it removed the pressure of pretending. The world often wants resolution, clear endings, simple answers, but life doesn't move that way, especially not when you grow up together under circumstances that demand strength before you understand yourself. What existed between Jungkook and me was never isolated from the others. That's something people misunderstand the most. There was no betrayal, no division. If anything, it deepened our respect for each other. We learned how fragile trust can feel and how powerful it becomes when protected. Fame turns personal truth into public property. I struggled with that more than I ever admitted. There were nights I wondered if silence was the same as lying, if protecting what mattered meant hurting people who believed in us. Over time, I realized honesty doesn't always mean revealing everything. Sometimes it means living truthfully, even if the world only sees fragments. We never tried to define ourselves with labels. What mattered was the connection, the understanding that didn't require explanation. Whether we were laughing over something trivial or sitting side by side in complete silence, There was a sense of home I hadn't known before. That doesn't erase the past. It doesn't rewrite it. It simply adds another layer to who we are. As BTS, we've always believed that love in all its forms deserves respect. That belief wasn't just something we shared through music. It was something we practiced among ourselves, in small, deliberate ways, in patience, in protection, in choosing each other even when things felt complicated. Whatever people decide to believe, I hope they remember that behind every story are real hearts, real friendships, real growth. This journey didn't end with one conversation or one moment of honesty. It continues, shaped by understanding, by restraint, by the quiet courage it takes to be honest with yourself. And if the world finds that surprising, maybe it's because the truth was never meant to be shocking. It was always meant to be human. After the noise settled into something distant, the days became strangely still. Not peaceful in the way people imagine after a storm, but thinner, as if the air itself required more intention to breathe. I moved through schedules, rehearsals, and familiar routines with a heightened awareness of everything around me. The weight of being seen felt different now. Less sharp, but more constant. Quiet has always followed me. Not loneliness, but quiet. The kind that invites reflection whether you're ready for it or not. I've learned over the years that silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. Often, it's where the most important changes begin. I spent more time alone than usual, not out of withdrawal but necessity, to listen to myself without the echo of the world's expectations. In those moments, I realized how much of my life had been shaped by learning when not to speak, when restraint was praised, when composure was expected, and yet the cost of that discipline had always been internal. Music helped, it always does, not as performance but as refuge. Late at night, melodies came without intention, notes that didn't ask to be perfect, lyrics that didn't need to explain themselves. That space reminded me why I started this journey in the first place, before interpretation, before meaning was demanded, before every emotion had to be justified. Jungkook and I didn't talk every day, and that felt right. We were giving each other room to exist separately without tension, without pressure to define what had already been acknowledged. When we did speak, it was easy, familiar, like returning to a language we never forgot. There was one evening when we sat together without realizing how much time had passed. No deep conversation, just presence, the kind that steadies you. At some point, he laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that carries relief rather than humor. He said it felt strange to finally breathe without holding something back. I understood exactly what he meant. The others watched us carefully, not out of suspicion, but care. There was an unspoken agreement between all seven of us. Protect what matters, move forward together. We had always done that instinctively, but now it felt more deliberate. Namjoon checked in often, not with questions but with space. He has a way of offering support without making it feel like supervision. He reminded me that clarity doesn't arrive all at once. That growth happens in layers, and each layer deserves patience. Jin's presence stayed grounding. He found ways to normalize everything, to remind us that life continues even when narratives try to freeze moments in time. He made food. He joked. He asked about the small things, and in doing so, he kept us human. Yoongi's music echoed through the studio late one night, low and unannounced. I sat listening, realizing how much he communicates without speaking directly. His understanding doesn't need confirmation. It exists in the way he lets people be exactly where they are. Hosok's energy shifted subtly, becoming softer, more attentive. He encouraged movement not as distraction but release, dance without audience, motion without intention, joy without explanation. Watching him reminded me that light doesn't ignore darkness, it moves through it. Jimin stayed close in ways only he can, quiet conversations, long looks that asked questions without words. He didn't need answers, he needed honesty, and in that he offered the same back. His empathy has always been a mirror, reflecting truths gently enough to be faced. In those days, I understood something important. Closure is not always an ending. Sometimes it's acceptance. The willingness to let something exist without needing to shape it for others. The world often demands conclusions, final statements, clear lines, but life continues beyond the frame. What I shared wasn't meant to define Jungkook or me forever. It wasn't meant to lock us into a version of ourselves. It was meant to acknowledge a chapter that shaped us and then allow us to keep growing. I stopped reading reactions, not because I didn't care, but because caring too much would pull me back into noise. I trusted that the people who truly listened would hear what mattered. The rest would pass, as stories always do. There were moments when doubt crept in, when I wondered if honesty had created distance instead of understanding. But each time, reality answered quietly, in shared meals, in group laughter, in the rhythm of rehearsals where nothing had truly changed. We were still seven, still moving together, still choosing each other. One night, as I lay awake listening to the city outside, I realized something had shifted permanently. Not externally, but internally. I was no longer afraid of my own truth, whatever shape it took, whatever pace it moved at. That acceptance didn't erase uncertainty, but it softened it. Being an artist means living with questions. Being human means allowing those questions to exist without forcing answers. I had spent years trying to control perception, to stay ahead of interpretation. Now, I was learning the relief of letting go. Jungkook once told me that courage doesn't always feel brave in the moment. Sometimes it just feels quiet, ordinary, like choosing not to turn away. That thought stayed with me as days passed and the world continued spinning. The truth didn't ask for attention anymore. It simply existed, and in that existence it felt lighter. I didn't know what the future would look like. I still don't. But I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever came next, I wouldn't face it fragmented. I would face it whole, as myself, as part of something larger than any single story. And maybe that's what growth really is. Not becoming someone new, but allowing yourself to be fully present as who you already are. As time moved forward, I stopped thinking about moments as things that needed to be explained. I began to see them for what they were, pieces of a larger life, not headlines, not statements, just experiences that shaped me quietly. The urgency faded. What remained was clarity. There's a strange freedom that comes when you no longer feel the need to defend your own truth. I didn't reach that place overnight. It came slowly, through ordinary days, through rehearsals that felt grounding again, through laughter that wasn't forced, through the comfort of familiarity returning without effort. Jungkook and I found our rhythm again, not as something new, but as something steady. There was no tension left to resolve, no weight pressing between us, just understanding. The kind that doesn't need reassurance because it's already been tested. Whatever people imagined, whatever narratives formed outside, inside there was balance. We didn't try to preserve anything by holding it too tightly. We let it breathe. That was the difference. Growth doesn't always look like change. Sometimes it looks like allowing something to exist without fear of losing it. The group felt stronger in a quiet way. Not louder, not more dramatic, just more rooted. We had faced something delicate together and come out without fracture. That matters more than people realize. Trust isn't built during easy times. It's built when things are complicated and you still choose care over reaction. I thought a lot about fans during this time, about how much they invest emotionally, how deeply they connect to stories that give them comfort or hope. I never wanted honesty to feel like betrayal. If anything, I wanted it to feel like respect. Respect for the people who listen, who feel, who grow alongside us. At the same time, I learned that not every part of me needs to be shared to be real. Privacy isn't secrecy. It's stewardship. It's choosing what deserves protection so it can remain sincere. The world doesn't need every detail to understand the heart of something. Music became clearer again, Not heavier, not lighter, just honest. When I sang, I wasn't carrying hidden weight anymore. I wasn't performing distance. I was present, and presence changes everything. There were moments on stage where I caught Jungkook's eye and nothing needed to be said. No message, no signal, just recognition. The kind that comes from having walked through something together and not pretending it didn't matter. People often ask when things return to normal, but normal is a moving concept. What we returned to wasn't the past. It was something more grounded, less fragile, built on acceptance rather than avoidance. I stopped worrying about how the story would be remembered. Stories evolve. What mattered was how it felt to live it honestly. To know that when I looked back, I wouldn't regret staying silent out of fear. I would remember choosing integrity over comfort. There is courage in gentleness, in restraint, in letting things be what they are without demanding they become something else. That's something this experience taught me deeply. If there's one thing I hope people take from all of this, it's not shock or speculation. It's understanding. Understanding that connection takes many forms, that growth is rarely dramatic in real life, that honesty doesn't always come with loud conclusions. Sometimes it simply comes with peace. We continue forward, as artists, as friends, as 7 individuals moving through life together. The past remains part of us, but it doesn't define us. It informs us, strengthens us, softens us where we need it. I don't know what stories the world will tell next. I don't try to predict them anymore. What I know is this: whatever comes, I will meet it without hiding from myself. And that, more than anything, feels like freedom. There is a moment after everything has been said, when life doesn't rush to fill the space. It simply continues. That's where I find myself now. Not at the center of a storm, not at the end of a story, but standing quietly in the middle of my own life, still moving forward. Time has a way of softening sharp edges. What once felt overwhelming now feels integrated, like a memory that no longer hurts when you touch it. I don't revisit the past to analyze it anymore. I let it exist as proof that I lived honestly, even when it was uncomfortable. Jungkook and I don't reference that moment often. We don't need to. Some understandings don't require maintenance through conversation. They live in behavior, in trust, in how easily things flow when there is nothing left to hide. When we work together now, there's a quiet confidence between us. No hesitation, no distance disguised as professionalism, just familiarity shaped by respect. It's subtle, but it's real, and those who pay attention can feel it. The world has moved on to other stories, as it always does. New headlines, new speculations, new distractions. That used to bother me more than I admitted. Now it doesn't. I've learned that attention is temporary, but the way you live with yourself is permanent. I've become more selective with my energy, more intentional with my words, not because I'm afraid, but because I value what deserves to be protected. Peace is not something you stumble into. It's something you choose again and again. Being part of BTS means carrying many identities at once: artist, performer, public figure. But beneath all of that, I am still just someone learning how to live truthfully. That doesn't change because of fame. If anything, it becomes more important. There are days when I look around and feel grateful in a way that's hard to articulate. Grateful for the people who stayed steady, for the moments that challenged me, for the honesty that reshaped me instead of breaking me. I no longer measure my life by reactions. I measure it by alignment, by whether my inner voice and my outer actions are finally speaking the same language. That alignment brings a kind of calm no applause ever could. If this story had one purpose, maybe it was never meant to shock. Maybe it was meant to remind people that growth doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it happens quietly, in private decisions, in restrained courage, in choosing truth even when it complicates things. I'm still here, still learning, still creating, still moving forward with the people who matter. Nothing ended, something matured. And that feels right. Thank you for being here until the end. Thank you for listening without demanding answers. Thank you for allowing this story to be what it is, human, unfinished, and real. We'll keep going. Together,